They say trust is the foundation of any marriage. For 8 years, I believed that. I trusted Sophie with my life, my kids, my everything. We had what I thought was a good marriage. Not perfect, but solid. Sure, we had our disagreements, but who doesn't? And yet, here I am, staring at the rubble of what I thought we had, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. It wasn't some dramatic fight that started it. Nos criamos, nos lamemos dos, no teatro acusações. It began with a single conversation, a casual suggestion that spiraled into something I could never have imagined. It was a Tuesday night. Sophie and I were lying in bed, winding down after a long day. She was scrolling through her phone, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked, even in the dim light of our bedroom. She turned to me, her face lit with that mixture of excitement and nervousness I'd come to recognize. "Ryan," she said hesitantly, her voice light, but with a weight underneath. "What's up?" I replied, not looking up from the emails I was checking on my laptop. She paused, and that should have been my first clue. Sophie wasn't one to hesitate. The neighbors, Eric and Claire, invited us to a party this weekend. Oh, I glanced at her, vaguely interested. Eric and Claire were a friendly couple who'd moved in next door about a year ago. They were in their late 30s, no kids, always hosting barbecues and block parties. "Yeah," she said, sitting up slightly. "But, it's not your typical party." That got my attention. I closed my laptop and looked at her. "What kind of party is it?" She bit her lip, a nervous habit that suddenly felt less endearing. "It's a swingers party." For a moment, I thought she was joking. I even let out a short laugh, expecting her to smile and admit it was a prank. But she didn't. She just stared at me, waiting for my reaction. "You're kidding," I said, the laughter fading from my voice. She shook her head. "No. They told me about it when I was over there yesterday. They said it's a really fun way to spice things up." "Spice things up?" I repeated, incredulous. "Are you serious right now?" Her cheeks flushed, but she held my gaze. "Ryan, think about it. We've been in a rut lately. Don't you think it could be fun to try something new?" I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. "Sophie, you're talking about sleeping with other people. How is that supposed to help us?" "It's not about sleeping with other people," she argued, her voice growing more insistent. "It's about reconnecting with each other. Eric and Claire said it brought them closer as a couple." "I don't care about Eric and Claire," I snapped, sitting up. "I care about us. And this is insane." "It's not insane," she said, her tone defensive. "It's just different. Don't you think we've gotten too comfortable? Too predictable?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Predictable is fine. Predictable means we're stable, Sophie. It doesn't mean we need to. I stopped, shaking my head. "No, I'm not doing this." She sighed, exasperated. "I'm not saying we have to decide right now. Just think about it. Please." I didn't respond. I rolled over and closed my eyes, hoping the conversation would just end. But it didn't. Over the next few days, Sophie kept bringing it up. She'd catch me while I was making coffee or folding laundry, her voice soft and coaxing. "Ryan, just one night. That's all I'm asking. It doesn't have to mean anything." Each time, I shut her down, and each time, her insistence grew stronger. By Thursday night, the pretense of compromise was gone. I was tucking our son, Ethan, in a bed when Sophie cornered me in the hallway. "I'm going," she said, her tone sharp and defiant. I blinked at her, caught off guard. "What?" "To the party." "I'm going," she repeated. "You're joking," I said, though I could tell she wasn't. "No, I'm not," she said, crossing her arms. "If you don't want to come, fine. But I'm not going to miss out because you're too stubborn to try something new." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "What about Ethan? Who's going to watch him?" "We'll hire a babysitter," she said with a shrug. "It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal to me," I said, my voice rising. "You really think this is okay? That this is good for our marriage?" "Yes, I do," she snapped. "You're so uptight, Ryan. It's one night. And if you weren't so close-minded, you'd come too. Maybe it would help us." "Help us?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "Help us how? By watching you with another man?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." That was it. I couldn't take any more. "Sophie," I said, my tone low and steady. If you go to this party, we're done. I mean it. I'll file for divorce. Her lips parted in surprise, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. You'd throw away our marriage over one night? That's pathetic. No, I said firmly. You're throwing it away by even considering this. She scoffed, shaking her head like I was the unreasonable one. Fine, if that's how you feel, then maybe this marriage isn't what I thought it was. I didn't respond. I just stood there, my heart pounding, as she turned and walked away. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved become this stranger standing in my kitchen, casually tossing aside everything we'd built together? By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, our marriage would never be the same. Saturday came faster than I expected. The tension between Sophie and me was palpable all week, neither of us willing to back down. She didn't bring up the party again, and I foolishly hoped that meant she had changed her mind. But as I came home from work that evening, I knew she hadn't. The first thing I noticed was the smell of her perfume, stronger than usual, almost overwhelming. Then I saw her in the living room, standing in front of the mirror. She was wearing a black dress I hadn't seen in years, one that clung to her in all the right places. Her hair was curled, her makeup flawless. For a moment, I just stared. She looked incredible. It hurt to admit it, but she did. And then the realization hit me, and the admiration turned to anger. You're really going, I said, my voice cold. She turned to me, her expression calm. Yes, I am. Unbelievable, I muttered, dropping my keys on the counter. I already called the babysitter, she said, ignoring my tone. She'll be here in 20 minutes. I laughed bitterly. Wow, you really thought this through, didn't you? Ryan, we've been over this, she said, her voice laced with impatience. I need this. We need this. No, Sophie, I shot back. You need this. Don't pretend this is about us. She sighed and grabbed her clutch, clearly done with the conversation. I'm not going to argue with you. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. And just like that, she walked out the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been. A part of me wanted to chase after her, to drag her back inside, and demand she choose me or this ridiculous party. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, and wondered how the hell we'd gotten here. The hours passed slowly. The babysitter came and went, leaving once Ethan was sound asleep. I sat in the darkened living room, my mind spinning with 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. What was she doing right now? Was she talking to someone? Laughing? Dancing? Kissing? I shook the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, relentless and cruel. By the time the clock struck midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and opened the GPS tracker I'd installed on her car months ago. It wasn't something I'd ever used before. I'd put it there for safety, not to spy. But tonight, all bets were off. The map loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, my stomach sank. Her car was parked in the upscale neighborhood where Eric and Claire lived. I stared at the little blinking dot on the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't just sit there anymore. I grabbed my jacket and keys, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was driving. Eric and Claire's house was exactly what you'd expect from people who hosted swinger parties. Big, modern, and obnoxiously perfect. Cars lined the street, the driveway packed with high-end models. I parked a block away and walked up, my fists clenched at my sides. The house was lit up, music spilling out through the open windows. I could see silhouettes of people inside, laughing, drinking, mingling. My stomach churned as I approached the door. What the hell was I doing? What was I going to say if I saw her? But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The door was ajar, and I slipped inside, my heart pounding in my ears. The living room was packed with people, most of them dressed far more provocatively than I'd expected. Women in lingerie, men in tailored suits, or nothing more than boxers. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and something else, something darker. I scanned the crowd, my eyes darting from face to face, looking for Sophie. My stomach twisted as I spotted Eric, leaning casually against the bar with a drink in hand. He saw me too and raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Ryan," he said, his tone more amused than anything. "Didn't think I'd see you here." "Where is she?" I asked, ignoring the pleasantries. "Who?" he asked, though the smirk on his face told me he knew exactly who I meant. "Sophie," I said through gritted teeth. "Where is she?" Eric shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "She's around. Why don't you grab a drink and relax? You look like you could use it." I didn't respond. I pushed past him, moving deeper into the house. My heart was racing, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, fear, and desperation. I found her in the den, sitting on a plush couch with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dark-haired, and laughing at something she'd said. She was smiling too, her body angled toward him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Something in me snapped. "Sophie," I said, my voice sharp and loud enough to cut through the noise. Her head whipped around, her smile vanishing as she saw me. "Ryan?" The man beside her glanced at me, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sophie demanded, standing up. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice shaking. "Ryan, I told you." "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to act like this is normal." She glanced around, clearly embarrassed by the scene I was causing. "Can we talk outside?" "Sure," I said, my tone cold. She led me out to the backyard, where the music was quieter, the air cooler. I could still hear the faint murmur of voices inside, but out here, it was just the two of us. "What are you doing here?" she asked again, crossing her arms. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice low and furious. "But I already know the answer, don't I?" "It's not what you think," she said, her tone defensive. "Oh, really?" I said, laughing bitterly. "So, you're not in there flirting with some guy while I'm at home with our son?" "It's not like that," she insisted. "Then what is it like, Sophie?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like you're throwing our marriage away." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down, her expression torn. "Ryan, I didn't come here to hurt you." "Then why did you come?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I don't know," she admitted. I needed something. Something different. I'm sorry." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't compete with whatever this is." "Ryan." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You made your choice, Sophie. Now I'm making mine." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the cold. The next few days after the party were a blur. I didn't know if Sophie would come home that night or stay out, but eventually, just before dawn, I heard the soft creak of the front door. I didn't get up. I didn't want to see her, not yet. When I woke up later that morning, she was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. She looked tired. Hair messy, no makeup, her black dress replaced with a worn sweatshirt and pajama pants. For a moment, she looked like the woman I married. But then I remembered. I stood in the doorway, watching her. She didn't say anything, didn't even look at me. "You're not even going to explain, are you?" I finally said, breaking the silence. Her hands tightened around the coffee mug, her knuckles turning white. "I already told you, it wasn't what you think. And I'm supposed to just take your word for it?" I snapped. "After what I saw." "Nothing happened, Ryan," she said, her voice rising. "I talk to people. That's it. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like my own. "Out of proportion? You were at a party full of half-naked strangers, Sophie, flirting with some guy, and you think I'm the one overreacting?" Her face flushed with anger. "I needed a night out. I needed to feel like myself again, Ryan. God, do you even realize how much I've given up for this family? For you? And what about me?" I shot back. "Do you think I haven't given up anything? Do you think this is easy for me?" "Easy," she repeated, laughing bitterly. "You go to work, you come home, you put Ethan to bed, and then you sit on the couch and scroll through your phone. That's your life, Ryan. Mine is cleaning up after you, after Ethan, after this entire house. I am suffocating." Her words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. So that's your excuse? I said finally. You're bored, so you go to some hookup party to feel alive again? She shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You don't understand. You've never understood. No, Sophie, I said, my voice hard. You're right. I don't understand. Because I would never do this to you. To us. We didn't speak after that. She grabbed her keys and left the house, slamming the door behind her. I spent the next week in a fog. We barely spoke, just enough to coordinate who would pick Ethan up from daycare or who would cook dinner. The tension in the house was unbearable, like walking on a tightrope, waiting for it to snap. And then one night it did. I had put Ethan to bed and was about to settle on the couch when Sophie's phone buzzed on the counter. She wasn't in the room, and I don't know what came over me, but I picked it up. It was a text. Mike, you looked amazing last night. I can't stop thinking about you. My heart stopped. Mike! I knew who he was, of course. He was the guy from the party. The one I'd seen her laughing with, touching, smiling at. The one who made me feel invisible. I stared at the message, my mind racing. She hadn't just talked to people. She had connected with him. The floor creaked behind me, and I turned to see Sophie standing in the doorway. Her face went pale when she saw the phone in my hand. Ryan, she said slowly, her voice cautious. Who's Mike? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at me, then at the phone, and I saw the truth in her eyes before she even said it. It's not what you think, she said, the same line she'd used 100 times before. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't insult me by pretending this is nothing. She crossed the room, trying to take the phone from me, but I pulled it away. Ryan, please. How long? I demanded, my voice shaking. How long has this been going on? It hasn't, she said quickly. I swear. I've only seen him a couple of times. A couple of times? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been meeting him? Her silence was answer enough. I stared at her, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. Why, Sophie? Why would you do this? I don't know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was lonely. And he made me feel wanted. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I wanted you, I said, my voice breaking. I've always wanted you. But I guess that wasn't enough. She started to cry harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. Ryan, please, she begged. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, stepping back. You've already made your choice, Sophie. And now I have to make mine. She reached for me, but I turned away, heading for the door. I needed air. I needed to get out of that house, away from her and the betrayal that now tainted everything we'd built together. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me, but it did nothing to numb the pain. I stood there for a long time, staring up at the stars, wondering how we'd gotten here, and if there was any way back. The night I walked out, I didn't go far. I drove around aimlessly for a while, my mind racing. Every moment with Sophie played in my head like an old home movie, taunting me with what we'd had and what we'd lost. I ended up parking in an empty lot near the park where I used to take Ethan. I stayed there for hours, just sitting in the dark, trying to process everything. Eventually, I went home. The house was silent, the lights off. I checked on Ethan, who was fast asleep, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. Sophie's bedroom door was shut, and I didn't bother opening it. Instead, I grabbed a pillow and blanket from the hall closet and crashed on the couch. I told myself I'd confront her in the morning, that we'd have a real conversation about where we stood. But morning came, and Sophie was gone. The next few days were a blur of avoidance. Sophie and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped and tense. I didn't know how to move forward, or if I even wanted to. Then, on Friday, Sophie said she had plans with friends again. She didn't bother to elaborate, and I didn't bother asking. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. By 9 p.m., Ethan was asleep, and I was sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. The urge to check on her gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove to the address I remember from that night at the party. It was a long shot, but something told me I'd find her there. When I pulled up outside the house, my stomach churned. The same music thumped from inside, and the same dim, colorful lights spilled through the windows. People were milling around on the porch, laughing and drinking. I parked a few houses down and sat in my car for a minute, trying to calm the storm inside me. Then, with a deep breath, I got out and walked toward the house. Inside, the scene was eerily familiar. Strangers packed together, drinks in hand, the air thick with the scent of sweat and alcohol. My eyes scanned the room, searching for Sophie. And then I saw her. She was in the corner, leaning against the wall with a drink in her hand. And she wasn't alone. Mike was there, standing so close their bodies were almost touching. He was smiling, saying something that made her laugh. And then, as I watched, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I should have walked away. I should have turned around and left before I saw anything else. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, watching as the woman I'd built my life with leaned into another man. And then it happened. Mike leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't just a quick kiss either. It was slow, deliberate, like he wanted to make sure she felt every second of it. And she didn't pull away. If anything, she kissed him back. Something inside me snapped. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was across the room. People moved out of my way as I stormed toward them, their laughter and conversation fading into a dull roar. "Sophie!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. "Ryan!" Mike stepped back, his expression shifting from confusion to a smug sort of amusement. "Well, this is awkward," he said, folding his arms. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Sophie. "So this is it?" I demanded. "This is what you've been sneaking off to do?" "Ryan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Not here." "Why not?" I shot back. "You didn't seem to care who was watching 5 seconds ago." The room had gone silent. Everyone was staring at us, their eyes darting between Sophie and me like we were the main event. "Let's go outside," Sophie pleaded, grabbing my arm. I yanked it away. "No, Sophie. We're doing this now. Right here, right in front of everyone, since you don't seem to care about privacy anymore." Mike took a step forward, his smug expression hardening. "Hey man, maybe you should calm down." I turned to him, my fists clenched. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Mike. You don't get to say a damn thing to me." "Ryan, stop," Sophie said, stepping between us. "Please, just stop." I looked at her, my chest heaving, my vision blurred with anger and betrayal. "You lied to me," I said, my voice breaking. "You lied to me over and over again. And for what?" "For him." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Do you love him?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a knife. Her silence was deafening. I felt the room spinning around me, the walls closing in. I couldn't do this. Not here, not like this. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove away, I realized something. This wasn't just a crack in our marriage. This was the end. Driving home that night, I felt hollow, like someone had carved out my insides and left me with nothing but an aching void. The anger that had propelled me out of that house had burned away, leaving behind a suffocating mix of pain and numbness. When I got home, the house was dark and silent, just like it had been so many nights before. I stood in the living room for what felt like an eternity, staring at the couch where I'd slept for the past week. It hit me then, this wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I climbed the stairs to Ethan's room and cracked the door open. He was fast asleep, his little face peaceful and untroubled. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart breaking all over again. This was the hardest part. No matter how much Sophie had hurt me, Ethan was still my son. He was innocent in all of this, and the thought of him growing up in a broken home gutted me. But staying in this marriage for his sake would only teach him that it was okay to accept less than he deserved. And I couldn't do that to him, or to myself. The next morning, Sophie wasn't home. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't expected her to come back after the scene I caused. I spent the day in a haze, going through the motions but barely holding it together. At some point, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "We need to talk. Can I come by tonight?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a single word. "Fine." She showed up around 8 p.m. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. I could tell she'd been crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. We sat across from each other in the living room, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "Sorry for what? For lying to me? For cheating on me? For destroying our family? You're going to have to be a little more specific, Sophie." She flinched but didn't look away. "For all of it," she said. "For everything. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I hate myself for it." "Do you?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because it didn't look like you hated yourself last night when you were kissing him." Tears welled up in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I felt so lost, Ryan. So disconnected. And Mikey was there. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in so long." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. "See?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I was right here, Sophie. I've always been here. You just chose to look past me." "I know," she said, sobbing now. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "You don't do this to someone you love. You don't betray them, lie to them, humiliate them in front of a room full of strangers. That's not love, Sophie. That's selfishness." She didn't say anything, and for a while, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us. Finally, I broke it. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore. I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever will. For Ethan's sake, I'll always be civil with you. But as far as we're concerned, this is the end." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Sophie moved out, and we agreed on a custody arrangement for Ethan. I tried to shield him from the worst of it, but he wasn't stupid. He knew something had changed, even if he didn't fully understand what. I started seeing a therapist, which was something I never thought I'd do. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in my life helped me sort through the mess in my head. I realized I'd spent so much time blaming myself for Sophie's actions, wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth was, this wasn't my fault. She made her choices, and now we were both living with the consequences. One evening, after I'd put Ethan to bed, I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I'd be okay. I had Ethan, and I had myself. That was enough. Epilogue. 6 months later, I ran into Sophie at Ethan's school play. She looked different, older, maybe, or just more tired. We exchanged polite smiles, but didn't speak. As I watched Ethan on stage, my heart swelled with pride. He was my anchor, the reason I kept going even when it felt impossible. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.